right? As we're give people a few seconds and then we'll officially kick off. Julie, Julia, are you good to go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great,
So
I'll change the slide.
fantastic. Thank you all for chiming in on the Mentimeter slide. It's really exciting to see where everyone is coming from and the different goals that we have coming here today. Thank you all so much for joining us toward a Rainproof Miami. Today we are going to go ahead and go next slide if you'd like. Today we're going to be talking about solving complex flooding problems in different locations, sharing what is happening in Miami, but also learning from the experiences of our friends as part of the project Rainproof New York City by Rebuild by Design. We'll start with a quick introduction to dealing with rain and flooding in Miami with Dr. Rachel Silverstein of Miami Waterkeeper. We'll learn about the Rainproof Miami project, and then we're going to get right into our panel discussion with our incredible panelists, which I'm really excited to introduce. We'll have some time for Q&A with the audience after that. So if you have questions, put them in the chat or make a note, and then we'll have a short interactive session for building towards next steps at the very end of our event today. I'm going to click on through. So our goals today are to learn from the experiences of New York City. So really demonstrating the impact of the Rainproof New York City project, trying to understand better the Miami-Dade landscape and what we're dealing with here. Through all of that, really center our vulnerable communities. The risk that's faced from flooding is not faced equally in our cities, and really share insights from some of our Miami-Dade stakeholders and people on the call for what we want to see happen next. So I am so honored to introduce Dr. Rachel Silverstein, who is going to speak a little bit more about what we're facing in Miami. Dr. Silverstein is the CEO and waterkeeper for Miami Waterkeeper. Rachel, take it away.
Thanks so much, Julia. It's an honor to be here with all of you, and I'm so thrilled to see so many members of our community coming together to talk about this really important subject and rainproofing Miami, of course, with our friends from Rebuild by Design in New York. Miami Waterkeeper is a nonprofit focused on Miami-Dade and Broward County, and in short, protecting the water you love. And of course, we work on issues of clean water, of habitat protection, and sea level rise resiliency. And in doing the clean water work, we really started to realize the impact of climate change and sea level rise on the water pollution issues that we are experiencing here. We, of course, have here in Miami, beautiful Biscayne Bay, our coral reefs just offshore, and all of our water is really connected here in South Florida, both because we have these above ground canal systems, or, used to be ancestral Everglades from the Everglades system coming through now urban Miami and going out to Biscayne Bay. And then below ground as well, we have this very porous limestone geology that gives us really unique risks for sea level rise, for rainfall events, and a very shallow water table. So we get flooding relatively quickly, and we have risks that are affecting the waterfront parts of our community as well as inland parts of the community. So we've got water coming from the rain, from underground, from the Everglades, from the coast, really coming from all sides. So Miami is really one of the most vulnerable places in the world to sea level rise and climate change. And already in Miami, we have seen 6 inches of flooding measured since 1996. So that's not a model for the future. That's already what we've experienced. And it may not seem like a lot, just 6 inches. But that's already resulted in over 400% more flooding events. And we're projected to have another 6 inches of sea level rise in about half of that time now, as the rate of climate change and sea level rise is accelerating. So we're starting to really understand that much of our infrastructure here in Miami was not built for sea level rise, for the kind of heavy rains that we've been seeing for climate change. The canal system wasn't designed to be able to handle that volume of flow, the roads, the septic tanks. We have over 120,000 septic tanks built in the shallow water table here in Miami, causing major pollution events. Our sewage infrastructure is becoming overwhelmed with the groundwater infiltrating the pipes. And even our energy systems, like FPL's Turkey Point plant, and our sewage infrastructure plants are all on these coastal, really frontline locations for vulnerability. So we've been really looking at the root cause issue of a lot of the pollution, really understanding that it's all connected back to the climate and sea level rise challenges that we face as a community. And that's affecting not just our environment, but of course, our ability to have a good quality of life here in Miami, to live here. It's affecting different communities in different ways, but truly we're all at risk across the entire county. So understanding some of the decisions that we can make now that will affect the coming decades of life here in Miami. And if we get this right, we can truly provide an example for how this can be done for the rest of the United States, for the rest of the world, in a way that prioritizes the community that lives here and our environment together. And we are really interested in learning from what has been done in other places like New York, although we don't have the exact same issues, the exact same geology. We really want to understand what kind of urban planning, what kind of infrastructure projects have worked, and to really involve the stakeholders, the community, to hear what people want in their own neighborhoods and what they're experiencing themselves, so that we can try to implement that and make sure that as a county, we're having a direction that's towards a sustainable and resilient future. And so this is really, a first step to have this conversation. We're thrilled to be working with Rebuild by Design, who've had this really on the ground experience from New York, and to bring some of these lessons to Miami. So really excited to hear from the panel and all the experts that are here today, and looking forward to hearing all of your questions and ideas later in the program. Thank you. Back to you, Julia.
Muted myself. Thank you so much, Rachel. I think next up, we are going to hear directly from Rebuild by Design, about their experience. Take it away.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Rachel, for that amazing presentation on Miami and understanding Miami. I think similarly at Rainproof New York City, that was kind of our goal, is to make sure that it's replicable, but a replicable process that other cities can learn from while centering our own city. And so to introduce myself, my name is Rafal, and I'm the Rainproof New York City Fellow at Rebuild by Design. And I've been working as a Rainproof New York City Fellow for over the last year, really working on our rainproof work. And today I just wanted to share some of the process overview of Rainproof New York City, the working groups, and our entire process, because it's such an innovative process, to hopefully show Miami some inspiration on how they could also do a process that enters communities, but is also systematically innovative, and can address a lot of the intersectional challenges that come with climate change. And so before I begin my presentation, I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to Rebuild by Design. Rebuild by Design, we like to think of ourselves as a process that brings together global and local expertise to really tackle some of our most challenging issues, particularly because they're multidimensional. And we particularly focus on climate change related issues. So in my project, it's rainproof and increasing heavy rainfall in New York City. And we are a nonprofit organization that's housed under NYU's Institute for Public Knowledge. We've been here for the past 11 years now. And kind of why we're here today and how Rainproof New York City really came about is we recognized that there was an increasing challenge that New York City was facing, and a new reality that New Yorkers were being faced with, which is flooding that wasn't happening from coastal water, but actually from increasingly heavy rainfall. And we really saw this a lot of our hurricanes and our severe rainstorms, whether it's the tropical rainstorms like Ophelia or hurricanes like Ida. And we really saw that the current policies and infrastructures that we had in New York City weren't equipped to really address this new challenge that we were facing. And our overall goal with Rainproof New York City and addressing this challenge is for New York City to adapt to living with more water. We kind of recognize that this is our new reality. And so how do we address this new reality while making sure that we are centering our communities and protecting our communities? And a saying that really came out of our work is like New York City is usually known for being the concrete jungle. We kind of take that into being helping New York City transition from an urban jungle to an urban sponge. Um, and to really take us from the beginning, how we started is we put out a bunch of research. And so in 2021, immediately following Hurricane Ida, we brought together 20 experts to look at how New York City could transition to rainproof, or how they could deal with the future of flash floods across different sectors. So whether it's infrastructure, housing, policies, etc. And then together working with One Architecture, we put out a report in 2022 toward a rainproof New York City, which really envisioned how New York City could systematically address heavy rainfall and how it could envision a rainproof New York City. While addressing the challenges and the impediments that we had in envisioning a future. And that really laid the foundation for our work and actually got us to the Rainproof New York City working groups where we are today. And more recently, which is exactly a year ago, we worked with Ramble to put out a benefit cost analysis, which looked at if New York City were to invest in blue-green infrastructure, how much payback would we get? And we saw that for every dollar invested, we would get a $2 return. So it shows that actually systematically addressing rainfall and working is beneficial on multi dimensions and multi sectors. And our research really gave us a three-pronged approach to getting to rainproof, which is one, we start with the most socially and physically vulnerable communities. Two, we create a massive investment in multi-benefit green and blue solutions. And three, where we cannot go fully green, we prioritize co-benefit solutions. So it's looking at what we already have and reworking that to work in multiple benefits. And that whole research and kind of where I came in is to kick off our Rainproof New York City working group. So Rainproof New York City, that's whole kind of a process that we're having that is multi-pronged. But the Rainproof New York City working group process in particular is where we worked with New York City, the New York City government, and nonprofit organizations that you see on the screen here to launch 3 working groups that were time bound. And I'll get into a little bit more of the details now to really address the challenges of combating heavy rainfall in New York City. And we basically identified these 3 challenges that the working groups would work through. So challenge 1 is looking at managing increasing heavy rainfall. So how can we shift New York City's policies and priorities to create a comprehensive plan? Challenge 2 is really looking at housing mobility. So to kind of address New York City's housing mobility program that they are launching, and how do we make sure that it's equitable and centers our community? And challenge 3 is everyone has a role to play, which is really building the capacity for New Yorkers on every sectors, on every identification, experience, expertise to kind of take on managing heavy rainfall as a whole, because we see climate change is affecting everyone, not just one sector. And our goal with the Rainproof New York City working groups as a whole was to systematically help us address rainfall and to center our communities. And we did that through 1, adapting to living with water through a collaborative process by bringing together different expertise and experiences. 2, create a deeper understanding of intersectionality of heavy rainfall. So how it addresses economic impact, health impacts, mental, social resilience, etc. We saw that it touched a bunch of intersections. 3 is utilizing stakeholder inputs. And so Rainproof New York City working groups bring together a diverse set of expertise and experiences. And we really wanted to learn from those expertise and experiences and utilize those different sectors to really help us address heavy rainfall in ways that we wouldn't have been able to before. 4, and I think Miami touched on this, is to create a replicable model of community and government collaboration in policy design. So it's to really address the silos in government that New York City faced, but also kind of some of the distrust that we have between different sectors, some overlapping work, and really bring those people together and hopefully create a replicable model for Miami, for example, to take on and work through to address their challenges. And then 5, when we bring those different people together to really work together, put those recommendations together, pre-vet those recommendations, we kind of gain a shared ownership with the different stakeholders that are part of the process to address this challenge. So the burden of responsibility of addressing this challenge isn't just on one sector or one stakeholder. To give a little bit of the overview of the Rainproof New York City working groups and how we put it together is we gave one working group to each challenge area. So the 3 challenges of managing space, housing mobility, and everyone has a role to play. Each working group was designed to be transparent and collaborative. And so each one was co-facilitated by a New York City agency partner and an NGO partner. So for example, working group 1, which was addressing managing heavy rainfall, was co-led by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and the NGO partner was Regional Plan Association. And the decisions for each working group were made together, and then the working group as a whole would make decisions. And to make sure when managing so many different stakeholders, experiences, so many people working across different sectors, we found that having a time-bound process was the best because it helped kind of create a balance of flexibility, but also a balance of having set timelines and goals so that we would be able to give recommendations at the end. And how the Rainproof New York City working group process concluded is with a public symposium in June where we were able to publish all the recommendations that we had. We designed the working groups to be interdisciplinary. So it was comprised of multiple city agencies. We had 1 state and 1 federal, and multiple different stakeholders, whether they were community partners, community leaders, if they didn't want to identify with an organization, just wanted to identify as an individual, with public sector, private sector. And the overall coordination, which was very much needed to manage everyone, was done by Rebuild by Design, One Architecture, and the steering committee as a whole. And the co-facilitators would run their own working groups, and we would do check-ins weekly to make sure that we were all aligned across our working groups. So it works at multiple levels. To deep dive a little bit more on the numbers of Rainproof New York City, starting from the beginning, we did a call for applications back in November, and we did a targeted outreach to over 1,000 people, which I should know because that was my first task at Rebuild, was to create a comprehensive list. Even if organizations or people didn't necessarily work on climate, we really wanted to make sure that we were getting as many expertise and experiences on the ground from New York City because it's such a diverse city. And we reached over 8,000 people through general communications. And we received over 315 really, really amazing applications, which showed the interest of people in combating heavy rainfall in New York City. But because we wanted to keep the working groups small, we ended up choosing from those 315, 52 people, and 49 people accepted. They were representative of all 5 boroughs, representative of 12 neighborhood organizations, 21 city, state, or national nonprofits, and our agency partners from the government went through their own internal processes, and overall there were 14 city agencies represented, 1 state, 1 federal. And to give a little bit of insight, in New York City, we function as a little bit of siloed government. So part of this process was not just working across sectors, but also working across government agencies. And bringing these different city agencies, state and federal, was really worthwhile in my opinion. And then we had other academic, private, or philanthropy. Part of managing, bringing so many different people together, is to really build trust in one another, build genuine connection in one another. And we really did that through internal communications and events. So we found that by having site visits, we got to see how rain affected people on the ground. We got to know our working group members one-on-one, and that ended up making such more open conversation and better questions, and pushing the grain and figuring out really how can we systematically address this heavy rainfall. And then simultaneously, we saw that we had so much interest in Rainproof, not just by the working group members and our applicants, but around the world and around the country. So we simultaneously, with One Architecture, launched a public event series that is still ongoing. And we did outreach again to over 8,000 people, a mixture of newsletters, social media, targeted one-on-one outreach, in person. And we had over 1,000 people attend. Something that we think was really, really worthwhile during our process is we also did public feedback sessions. So before the Rainproof working groups published their recommendations, we did 2 public feedback sessions. One was virtual and one was in person, where we asked the wider New York City public to come hear what we were thinking of publishing and give us their insights, help us co-create principles together, help us figure out where everyone really stood. And then we concluded with our public symposium where we had over 260 attendees, and people really took it to the next step of growing the Rainproof New York City movement and taking ownership of the issue. This is just a visual because I know I threw a lot of information at you of the working group process. So from November, where we did our call to our symposium in June, and you can see that we had moments where we did check-ins across the working groups to make sure that we weren't really just funneled in on our only in our challenges, but also hearing from each other, and then concluded with our published recommendations. Something that I really wanted to point out, because we are learning from processes and how to make this process replicable, is being okay with having a set idea in the beginning, and then once bringing people together, you see those set ideas change. And kind of to show you how we envision that is the challenges themselves, the questions that we had outlined changed once we brought all those different experiences and expertise together. So for example, for challenge one, which was really looking at managing space, once we brought together the engineers, the community members, the private sector, the question really changed to how can we effectively utilize space in New York City to equitably reduce the risk from heavy rain and add value to communities. And that's just that similar things happens in the other working groups, and that's just to show how much these things change, and it's okay for these things to change. This is a very, very high level overview of the recommendations that came out of Rainproof New York City working groups that we are working right now to implement. So for managing increasing heavy rainfall, they had over 13 recommendations that were broken down into 3 themes. So learning to live with water, integrating green and gray infrastructure, and 3, improving and expanding natural systems. And I'll have Johanna, my colleague, drop the link to the actual recommendation so you can read it, which shows our implementation, who we address these recommendations to, what the recommendation is, etc. And you can read that on your own time. And then for housing mobility, or working group 2, because they were working with a program or an initiative that was already starting by the New York City government, they instead outlined principles for that program's implementation and how to actually design that program. And so some of the principles are voluntary, make sure that the program is voluntary and well-informed, community-based and neighborhood-specific, housing-centered and housing-focused, equitable and renter-inclusive, environmentally restorative and integrated, permanent and adaptable. And a lot of these principles came about while doing a lot of community work, but also our feedback sessions, whether it was in between different working groups, but also when we did the public feedback sessions, particularly, for example, renter inclusivity. And for everyone has a role to play, which was really tasked with the difficult challenge of getting every single sector involved. Their recommendations addressed integrating Rainproof into every single community program or event, whether it has nothing to do with climate change, on mitigation, and that was really how to reach people in New York City. Prioritizing outreach on our most vulnerable and making sure that resources were accessible. So we saw in working group 3 that there were so many resources already available, but no one really could tap into it, especially if there were immigrant communities or communities that didn't have accessibility to the internet or couldn't really have the time to search these. And one interesting thing is investing in equipping in community leaders, or what we like to call risk translators. And basically, they are people that already know their communities and can communicate with their communities more effectively, and instead teaching them how to read weather forecasts, how to learn how to do mitigation and bring that back into their communities. And as a whole, just promoting cross-sector collaboration. And on June 25th, which is our public symposium, although that really marked the end of the Rainproof New York City working group process, it really marked the start of our Rainproof New York City journey as a whole, and growing the Rainproof New York City movement and getting every single person in New York involved, but also making sure that the process is replicable like we're doing right now with Miami. Rebuild by Design in particular is working with pilot programs on the ground, working to fund different journeys, working to really elevate the programming that's already working in New York City and make space for new initiatives. We're continuing our communications, and to really stick to our goal of being transparent is making sure that the working groups are informed of the city's progress. in implementing the recommendations. Three is we saw so much resources and work come out of the Rainproof working group process, and so we're building a public library that anyone can use, and then continuing our Rainproof event series. That concludes a very high-level look into the Rainproof New York City process. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And if you want to learn anything about Rainproof New York City, you just visit rainproof.nyc. I know we're short on time, so we're gonna kick it off directly into the panel discussion, and I'll just introduce our moderator. Today we're going to be moderated by Dr. Julia Western, an interdisciplinary social scientist from Miami Waterkeeper. She's the Vice President of Community Engagement at Miami Waterkeeper, and she's going to be very excitingly moderating our panel discussion today. So Julia, kicking off to you.
Fantastic. So excited to be here. And thank you so much for sharing. It's just such an incredible project, and I'm really excited to talk about it more. So we have some incredible panelists, as you can see here. I'm going to welcome them one by one and have you introduce yourselves briefly, your role in helping your community and your city adapt to increasing heavy rainfall and flooding. So first up, I'm going to call on Amy Monsney, Section Lead of Climate and Equity at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Julia. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So my name is Amy Monsney, and I'm a landscape architect by training, but more of a resiliency planner these days. And I work in our integrated water management unit at DEP. So what we do there is spearhead policy development, innovative partnerships, planning studies, and launch pilot programs to reduce system demand, protect critical infrastructure, enhance livable communities, and provide resilience against climate change. So on the resiliency front, my team at DEP has been leading the effort around cloudburst planning in New York City. For those unfamiliar with cloudburst, it's a technical term that describes sudden heavy rainfall that causes property damage, risks to property and human lives, and it's been increasing an issue in New York City. And I think one thing that astounds me is that, in the last couple of years, we've seen record-breaking rainfall events happen, and so much so that NOAA has reclassified the New York City region as a subtropical climate zone. So it's really changed the way we're framing our planning and prioritization of infrastructure needs. So one area that I'm just going to touch on is that we've launched the Cloudburst Planning Program in New York City, which really started as a feasibility study emerging from a sister city partnership with Copenhagen, who have been investing in this type of management for decades. And so we learned a lot from them, and it led to some pilot projects on our public housing campuses, NYCHA. We have some projects in construction right now, which has led to a proof of concept that's allowed us to scale up. So now we're implementing these solutions in neighborhoods or at the watershed scale. And they're really designed to absorb, store, and transfer stormwater. So kind of green infrastructure plus gray infrastructure that works synergistically to address the flooding challenges, but also offer an opportunity to look at open space and provide public amenities and engage the community as part of the design and planning. So thanks for having me, and pass it on.
Thank you so much. Next up, I'd like to welcome Kat Siebel, Community Climate Resiliency Coordinator from New York City's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm the Community Climate Resiliency Coordinator at the New York City Department of Health in the Bureau of Environmental Surveillance and Policy. So, I think just to take a step back, yes, we are on very different landscapes, but I think that we're similar in terms of the history that we are on stolen land and we're dealing with the repercussions, whether it's extreme heat or it's flooding. And that's how I look at my work, I look at how that all impacts and interplays with community health. And so I like to consider myself more action oriented or an embedded planner or what have you. But what that really means is I leave my desk. I leave my desk and I go out, I talk, I chat with people. And yeah, and I think through those partnerships, whether they are through local government or whether it's a community-based organization, I stop myself from saying an acronym. I think that's where you get really rich activities. And I think also centering community concerns from faith leaders, residents, community health workers. For me in particular, I do a lot of internal capacity building. That's where I've been able to collaborate, especially with Rainproof, who are more design focused or policymakers on like effective tools and resources. So ultimately, I think like how I phrase my work is through trainings. Honestly, it's kind of like that storytelling component because community health workers, they're there. And I especially tried to highlight how did we get here? Why is this happening? And also, like have those conversations on how it affects our health. Like the keyword being how all over New York City, in particular the Bronx, but at the Neighborhood Health Action Center. I'll just like phrase one event that happened here that during an air quality event that came from the wildfire smokes in Canada, who were the community calling? It was the community health workers at the Neighborhood Health Action Center. So I include them in my work. I want to be sure that they're equipped, they're ready to go. And so that way, when they're at any community board meeting or when they go to town halls or what have you, they're in the conversation. It doesn't just have to be me, nor should it have to be just me. Like we all have a role to play here. We all have a voice in this. And I think that's what I appreciated about the Rainproof is that it brought us all together and bringing in all of our different lenses. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next up, I am excited to welcome Rona Taylor, Executive Director of the Central and Southeast Brooklyn Community Development Corporation. Welcome, Rona.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Executive Director, as Julia mentioned, of the Central by Southeast Brooklyn Community Development Corporation, and we're focused on the holistic health and well-being of the residents of East Flatbush, Flatlands, and Canarsie. So this is like literally in the heart of Brooklyn. It's right in the center. And a lot of the work that I do is relationship building in the community, especially around this issue because this isn't typically an issue the way that environmental work has been framed, that people of color relate to the narrative. They think that it's something that's like, mainstream. It's, a white issue. It doesn't relate to them. And so a lot of my conversations have just been trying to meet people where they are and talk about these issues and find some common ground about where it has meaning for them in order to connect them so that they can become stewards of their communities and to also just pay forward what I learned in Rainproof NYC and share the information to help fortify and build their resilience as we face, these more increasing and intense climate change events.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, I'm going to introduce our panelists from Miami. First up, I have David Colangelo, Resiliency Plan Coordinator for the South Florida Water Management District. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Julia. Happy to be here. As you mentioned, I'm the Resiliency Plan Coordinator for South Florida Water Management District. The district is responsible for our area of operations is about 31% of the total land area of the state. So it's a very large area that we cover, and it's the most populated part of the state. I personally have over 25 years experience in project management, environmental policy, wetland ecology, and more recently, resiliency planning and implementation. As the resiliency plan coordinator, I'm responsible for developing the resiliency plan for the agency, along with an interdisciplinary team. Essentially, we use flood modeling information from our flood protection level of service studies in order to develop flood protection strategies that are scalable regionally. So throughout counties, we have 16 counties in our area. And so we work like on a basin level. We don't look at just little neighborhood projects. We're talking about large projects that cover, thousands of square miles. So I'm also responsible for applying for funding for these projects. And over the past 4 years, with our team, we've brought in over $300 million in funding from federal and state grant programs. So we're just getting started on actual implementation of some of these projects that we've gotten grants for. Some of them are in Miami-Dade County. Some of them are in Broward County. The most vulnerable areas tend to be Miami-Dade and Broward County in Florida right now that we're focusing on. And the projects they all have nature-based features in them. And the purpose is really to help communities adapt to increased flooding from sea level rise and from increased rainfall.
Fantastic. Thank you so much and welcome. Next, I'm excited to welcome Lauren Parra, Chief Bay and Water Resources Officer for Miami-Dade County. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, Julia. I'm glad to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. As Julia said, my name is Lauren Parra. I work for Miami-Dade County, which I think is an important distinction. And I think that some of our governance issues is actually a big challenge that we experience here in Miami-Dade. We have a strong county mayor who works very closely with our 34 cities and municipalities, one of which is represented here, our next panelist that I'm sure we're going to hear from shortly. And really, my charge is largely around water quality in Biscayne Bay. Biscayne Bay being the one of two massive water bodies that flank Miami-Dade County. So we're in this really rich and unique ecosystem where we have water on both sides of all of our developed community. And so as we think through restoration and improving water quality for all of the reasons that the Bay matters, right? Not only is it a massive economic driver for our community, but it's home to some of the most iconic marine species in the state of Florida, right? So mangroves, coral reefs, sea turtles, all of these natural wonders that are important for all of Florida. But it's really impossible to talk about water quality without talking about compound flooding and the way that we see increased rainfall, moving water, right, to protect people and property, which is absolutely non-negotiable, moving untreated water into Biscayne Bay. And so much of my job is working with all our cities, municipalities to figure out interventions that can actually address both, because we don't want to put our cities, municipalities in a place where they're having to choose one or the other.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren. And yes, as you alluded, finally, I am so happy to introduce and welcome Mayor Omar Nickerson, Mayor of the Village of El Portal, one of the municipalities within Miami-Dade County. Welcome.
Hello, how is everybody doing? Really appreciate being here. Shout out to everybody in New York. Shout out to all my NY people up there. See how y'all doing. Yes, I'm the mayor of the Village of El Portal. It's a municipality within Miami-Dade County. It just happens to be located in a strategic area where it's kind of like the center of Miami-Dade County's adaptation action area, adaptation action area, I should say. But and we're all 100% septic tanks. And that's the case, we have a lot of houses that are on the water. And so since we're 100% septic tank, nutrients go into that water and go out into the bay that our chief officer was just talking about. And so I'm here, I guess, as the lone elected official. So I can answer any of those type of questions, but I just want to say thank you to everybody. I appreciate being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And again, a warm welcome to all of our panelists. So let's really dive into the conversation here. My first question is to our panelists from New York, Kat, Amy, Rona. Can you speak to what motivated you to participate in the Rainproof New York City project, and what made that experience unique from previous city engagement or planning efforts? I'd say if you want to give me your real hand or a robot hand, I'm happy to call on people as they're ready to speak. Rona, kick us off.
Yeah, so I was really interested in Rainproof NYC because, understandably so, a lot of the narrative was around the coastal, like low-lying coastal areas of New York, so Red Hook, Canarsie, Coney Island, Rockaway, etc. And But to Rifal's point, one of the things that I didn't hear being spoken about was just the extreme rainfall that's like the cloudbursts that are happening, right? And also, Amy, you mentioned that as well. And so like no one is immune to that. And I felt like there were people, I have a neighbor who was like very unprepared during Hurricane Ida, who had experienced at least 12 feet of storm water in her home. And you know, she didn't have flood insurance, and she just didn't think that she was at risk, because if you look at the not really looking at anything of the borough. So I guess I just wanted to be able to lift up that narrative and to, you know, like bring awareness to people in Central Brooklyn, and also just to learn. And it was an amazing experience for me, as Kat mentioned, that, you know, there were so many different people with diverse backgrounds and experiences, and it was, for me, it was just very enriching. So I really appreciate all my colleagues as part of that.
Fantastic. Amy, Kat, anything to add?
And we appreciate you, Rona, and everything you do. Yes, and so Rona and I, we were in the same group. We were in working group 3, and I think it was just a mixed bag, and I appreciate it because it was a mixed bag. I think at least in the urban planning processes I've been a part of, it's always, I don't want to come off, you know, putting down.
Did we
Can
lose
people?
Kat? Oh, there she is.
We lost you, Kat. Come
Okay,
back.
sorry about that. Yeah, my internet's a little off. But I was just saying that it's usually the same people. It's usually the same urban planners or the same agencies or the same, and that's fine. Of course, they're gonna show up and do their job. But what I appreciated about this was that it was like strategically organizing people to come together from these different backgrounds. And I think for me, like I do community work, I do these trainings. And so it was very, very helpful to have all the folks in the room almost like showing their cards in a sense. Like in a card game, just showing like, oh, you have this type of tool, oh, you have this type of PDF on niche topic on flooding. And so for me, I almost felt that it was an opportunity to really bring all that together and bring it to my agency and be like, look, here's how we can fit in all of this. This is what we can do. Because I think in particular with New York City, there is an overrepresentation of Black residents that deal with confirmed sewer backup and that raw sewage exposure and what that does for waterborne diseases. And the waterborne diseases where we come in, that's where we have a part to play in particular. Also in terms of overcrowding, or where you have, as a result, psychological distress, drug and alcohol dependence, that's where we come in, right? That's where we have a role to play in all this. I think also there's one more aspect about flooding that we have with our Healthy Homes program, is that with flooding in particular, there's insufficient light and ventilation in that maintenance, especially from landlords or NIH developments, and that worsens respiratory health. And so I think that was kind of a part of a challenge for me, was figuring out like how to communicate and get us, more involved. But I saw it as a good first step. So both internally, but also externally. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like a real move towards holism as an approach. How about you, Amy?
Yeah, I think I would second that. I think the challenges related to urban flooding are infinitely complex and infinitely nuanced, and there's really no one silver bullet solution to solving our resiliency challenges. And at DEP, we're really pursuing a multi-pronged approach that includes short, medium, and long-term solutions that span kind of a range of implementation of new infrastructure, sewer system upgrades, increased maintenance, increased public awareness and preparedness, but also private property incentives and requirements, all with the overarching goal of reducing risk to people, communities, and infrastructure and property. So I think like a multi-pronged approach absolutely requires a multidisciplinary or multi-perspective solution. And I think this process really offered the opportunity to have those conversations, allowing us to sort of look at both how we might address things at the citywide scale, but also look at tailored approaches to address the local communities, risks and threats that are kind of not a one-size-fits-all solution. So yeah, I was very much enlightened by the process and this opportunity that we don't often have in the day-to-day, like busy work environment, to sort of sit down and have these conversations, align priorities, and establish new collaborations.
One of the things that I find most special about things like this project is obviously we join them thinking we're going to affect them, but we are changed in turn, like how we think about problems and the way that we do our work. With that in mind, specifically, I want to ask Rona, how have you taken some of the learnings that you've got from this larger project and brought it back and applied it at a really hyper-local scale when we think about these problems?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you asked that question because one of the things that it has resulted from being part of the work group is an offshoot of Rainproof NYC, which is Rainproof Flatbush. And Rainproof Flatbush is taking the lessons learned at the citywide level to a hyperlocal context. So we just have recently formed a group of members of the Rainproof NYC group who happen to live in that neighborhood. And we are planning our first event just to get some feedback from the community about where flooding is happening. It's giving us additional data points, you know, because again, like these may not be on any other map that we see, and we get to see at a hyperlocal context, like where people are experiencing flooding, and also like having access to their stories and like basing our solutions in those stories. So thank you for that question.
Fantastic. I'm going to turn to our Miami panelists. Now, each of you are dealing with flooding at different geographic scales in South Florida. What's one thing you want everyone on this call to know about solving flooding problems? It's really unique to Miami from your perspective. Whoever has an answer first, you can give me one of these. David.
Yeah, I think Miami is unique in that the scale of the system. I mean, you have like I was mentioning before, the district covers 31% of the land area of Florida to reduce flooding, control flooding, and Miami obviously very built up. The interesting thing about the system is that my agency manages the primary system, and that's the major canals and water control structures that flow to the coast. There are also the secondary and tertiary systems that are within the basin. The secondary systems are usually controlled and maintained by counties and cities and small water management districts within those regions. And then there's the tertiary systems, which are the neighborhood, the HOAs, and just neighborhoods. These systems have to all talk to each other, and they need to communicate constantly in order for everything to work right. If you have a neighborhood that has a clogged, some kind of clogged drainage, it doesn't matter if the primary system's working or the secondary system's working, because it's not going to get out of the neighborhood. So communicating with all the different stakeholders is a huge deal, and I think that's one of the ways that we solve that problem. But I think just the how intricate our flood control system is in South Florida is pretty unique.
Yeah, absolutely.
Challenging.
We can zoom in a little bit to the county scale. How about from your perspective, Lauren? What's unique about our area?
Thanks, Julia. Well, I was going to say something similar to David's point, but I think just to add to it, oh, excuse me, my kitten has decided to join us for a second. Pardon me.
Yeah. Always welcome.
Yes.
Always.
Sorry about that, guys. I would just say that because of that, I think pretty unique and very leveled governance structure on the management of all of those canals. I think most people don't know, and frankly, it shouldn't be top of mind for them. Before and after a storm, the amount of coordination that is happening across these parties is really remarkable. And so I think that is a testament to a lot of people taking this issue really very seriously. And I think outside of whatever national conversation, or excuse me, statewide conversation is happening, I think it's really good news for the residents of South Florida that all of their primary, secondary, and tertiary canal managers are taking this issue really seriously. And so just thinking back 2 weeks ago, as we were preparing for the oncoming storms, you know, constant updates multiple times a day at our emergency operations control center. We have a seat for the South Florida Water Management District. I mean, we are really working hand in hand to be on the same page ahead of expected storms and increased flooding. So I think that coordination and collaboration is really impressive.
Fantastic. Mayor Omar, from your perspective, what's unique? I mean, what is unique, but
well, yeah. So, you know, everybody knows flooding's a huge situation down here in Miami-Dade County. So, I think from the government point, and before I even go any further, I do want to give a shout out to you know, the interim CEO, you know, Amanda from Miami Waterkeeper, the entire Miami Waterkeeper team, and Elizabeth Fata Carpenter, who is on here listening, and she is the executive director of the Everglades Law Center, and she's the chairperson of our Sustainability and Resiliency Task Force. So she's wonderful. And she's the one that kind of keeps me educated on a lot of things because she keeps me informed about it because she has, you know, more knowledge in this area than I do. So I want to really appreciate Ms. Carpenter. But from a government point of view, I think that a lot of this really boils down to government want and willingness. That's basically what it is. Because, you know, a lot of times when, for example, I'll give a couple of examples. The first one I'll say is that, you know, sometimes I do speeches and they're about history and things like that. That's what, you know, my degrees are in history and social sciences and stuff like that. And I always tell individuals that, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who we all love, you know, he could have marched every single day, but if it wasn't for JFK and then Lyndon B. Johnson, those laws, the Civil Rights Act, the Housing Act, those laws wouldn't be in place. So you need the government to have want and willingness to really implement these things, to make these things happen. I remember the unfortunate, before I was even mayor, I was vice mayor. And I remember the unfortunate shooting at, what was it, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida. And I remember that year, our lobbyists, we had on like a whole bunch of different projects they were going for. The moment that happened, I remember them contacting us and being like, there's no more money for anything but school safety. That's it. The whole budget for Florida that year was school safety because it was the willingness and the want to do it. So all of this stuff comes down to the government has to prioritize it and has to look at it like that. When the government wants to do something, whether it's, you know, on a national level, like, you know, finding money for Ukraine, or whether it's on a local level, like finding money for when they want to find money for something, they find money for something. And when they think something's like, you know, an emergency, they'll do it. And so I just think that, you know, unfortunately, a lot of elected officials just don't think that it's almost like, you know, I have this thing, and I'm almost done. I have this thing where, you know, I have this thing that I implemented called the be proactive, not reactive, where outside, because El Portal is so small compared to like the city of Miami and Miami Beach and Miami Gardens and Hialeah, that when it's hurricane season, and let's say that, you know, there's like, you know, sandbag distribution and things like that, it's never in El Portal. Because they, you know, all that stuff goes to the big boys. It goes to the Miami beaches. It goes to the city of Miami. It goes to things like that. So when it's not hurricane season, I implemented this thing when I became mayor called the be proactive, not reactive strategy, where when it's not hurricane season and I don't have to compete with the big boys, I do all the hurricane preparation for my residents when it's not hurricane season. So then when hurricanes come around, it's hurricane season, we already have everything. They don't even have to stress about finding anything because we have everything already. So I think that's just what it comes down to: government willingness and want, or want and willingness, and government prioritization. They have to prioritize. If they don't prioritize it, then it's just not going to happen. 20 more seconds. You know, Ms. Fata Carpenter, Director Fata Carpenter would tell you guys, and the chairperson, she would tell you guys that when I became mayor, the first thing that I did was I said, because prior to me, the previous administration, I mean, we had like huge Halloween block parties. We had, you know, Easter celebrations. We had 4th of July cookouts. We had, when I came in, I was like, we're putting all of our resources into infrastructure. I was like, what are we celebrating? Like we partied away, the previous administration, we partied away for years and years. I think she was in power for 8 years. We partied away for years and years. I got in, I'm like, now one thing's been done about flooding. Now one thing's been done about stuff with the sewer. I'm on phase 2 already for my flooding drain, my flood drains. I've already did one whole part of the neighborhood for flood drains. So I would put drains in. So that's what's going on. It's just down to the government want and willingness and prioritization.
So I feel like this brings up an important part of the reality of doing this work, which is we're doing it in the context of a lot of decisions that came before us, where we put canals and where we decide to build, but also historic legacies of environmental injustice and racism, which can shape the problems that we're facing now and also potential solutions. I want to open up to any of our panelists that want to comment on this. How have those historic legacies and those current patterns shaped the way that you approach problems, the way that you're trying to solve those problems in your area? Give me a real hand, robot hand, come off mute. David, and then Rona. David, you were muted, my dear.
Of course I am.
Of course you are.
I just wanted to mention about like how we fund a lot of our projects, our resiliency projects. They're usually through grant programs, through federal and state grant programs. And a lot of these programs, they have requirements for making sure that we're serving vulnerable communities. The Justice 40 for the national grant programs. And it also seems that, as you know, most of the vulnerable communities are also the ones that flood the most. So we're focusing our plan on projects that definitely are, encompassing areas that can be considered vulnerable, both the flooding and financially vulnerable.
Rona, I remember seeing your hand, and then Kat, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I think that, when we look at, if we're talking about like legacy decisions, looking at historic redlining in the neighborhoods that I'm in, and, where we see this a lot is like with green space in our area, and there just isn't a lot of equity in terms of green space. And one of the things, how I feel like this connects to flooding is especially with like tree stewarding, right? A lot of people, we definitely suffer for an urban heat island effect. And also, because of the roles that the trees can play in mitigating flooding, people don't want trees in their front yards for many reasons, or in front of their houses. But, again, that's like a lot of education and kind of meeting people where they are, to have a discussion about like what this could really look like. It doesn't have to be a London plane tree in front of there are lots of different types of trees. So yeah, I just look at that in terms of like legacy decisions and how we're having to work toward mitigation and toward flooding.
Thank you so much. Kat?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I guess going back, right, disasters expose societal inequity. And so I look at it as what should have been there in the first place. Because like I mentioned in the opening, New York City developed over wetlands. What were wetlands supposed to do? They were meant to protect us from storm surge, and you just opened it like a Band-Aid over centuries. They're meant to act like a sponge. They're meant to soak up floodwater, and they're meant to filter pollutants. And then they're also a place for spiritual practice that we just built over. And so the same people, on term decades later, they're doing redlining and all sorts of discriminatory practices. And here we are. I don't think I think that's, at least that's how we approach it at Department of Health, is that we do look at, through our data tools, it's based on redlining, because that influences housing quality, and then, it just compounds and compounds and compounds. However, I think I will also add that sometimes data, not even sometimes, data can only tell you so much. you know, data, it's a tool. They're not going to give you all the answers. It's not like, okay, I'm done here, bye, you know, like, no, you need to go out and you need to talk to people. You need to ask community groups like, you know, hey, I saw that you're an HVI of 2, or something more approachable, of course, but I'm just making something up. Does this make sense? And they'll be like, no, actually, like, no, our block leader just went to the hospital because of a heat stroke or because of, you know, any sort of thing. And so I think it's in any case, that's how we look at it through data tools in particular. And then that influences our community engagement approach. And then from that community engagement, like, we're building up to go back to our policies and looking at max temperature policy, not just for winter times, but also for summer times. And oh, right. And also, I will add that our health action centers are located in what's called tree neighborhoods. I have no idea what that acronym stands for, but I just know that we did it during a COVID, and then COVID, surprise, is also exposed to climate change impacts as well. So that's some of the ways that we've been approaching. And I'll say that it's not always a linear process. It's, you know, you're making lefts and you're making rights, and you have to just revise your approach constantly. And I think I also would say that not to come in being open to being challenged, I think, is a big one too.
That's fantastic. So on the theme of tools and partnerships, for my Miami panelists, what are the tools and partnerships that you feel you need, that you're seeking out, to reach the next level of your efforts in dealing with flooding in Miami-Dade? Lauren.
Thanks, Julia. I'm happy to share that I think part of the county's success up until now has been largely defined by our mayor. And so we have the first female mayor in the history of our county, who is a trained social worker and just has really prioritized issues of community, very, very granular resident issues, but has an incredible sort of perspective around issues of the environment and resilience. And so I think for us, we have a lot of these, we have clarity around how government in general can be perceived by some of the neighborhoods that we are hoping to reach. And so for us, it's really important to make sure that we're working with the right community leaders, the right nonprofits, the right trusted voices, who are oftentimes a better messenger for the work that we're trying to do. And so I think for us, it's just always having clarity around who is your audience? Are we telling them what they need? Are they asking us for these solutions? And making sure that we're working with the right people that are those trusted advisors, then those trusted messengers, so that we can actually be effective with the work.
That makes a lot of sense. David, Mayor Omar, tools and partnerships. What are you eyeing? What's your wish list?
I can go.
Okay.
Well, it's about increasing our communication with our stakeholders. That's the biggest thing. We've been working hard on that. We have, as some of you know, we have quarterly resilience forums where we invite different groups, different stakeholders to present issues that are going on in their areas. And we use those forums in order to figure out, you know, where the most vulnerabilities are, hear directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and include them in our plans for developing resiliency projects. So I think that's, you know, continuing to do that and finding better ways of communicating and reaching our stakeholders is really key.
Mayor Omar, anything to add?
Yeah, I think we're in a great time right now. I think we've been since Mayor Levine Cava's come into power. You know, I'm from Miami. I was born in Miami, so I've been here the entire time. And Mayor Levine Cava is the first mayor that is, number one, engaged in the community the way she is, the first mayor. She's also the first mayor to even speak of the environment and sustainability and resiliency and climate change the way that she does. She's the first mayor in Miami-Dade County history to speak about it the way that she does. So I just think that right now we're in a position with you know, individuals like that. We have our chief bay officer, and she's doing wonderful. We have individuals like the Everglades Law Center, Miami Waterkeeper, and I think just with all these organizations and governmental entities that really are prioritizing this, at the same time, we're in a good position. Now, the problem is that, unfortunately, Miami-Dade County doesn't have, a pocketbook that extends like the state of Florida or the national government. So we just have to make sure, early voting started yesterday, Monday. So you have to make sure that you go to the polls because, I always say voting has consequences on one side or the other. And so who's in power really makes a huge impact. So I just want to, we're blessed right now to have Mayor Levine Cava, but she unfortunately won't be here forever because of, term limits. So we really need to strike the iron while it's hot and really put the work in now while we can.
Fantastic. So before we transition to audience questions, which we're going to do next, so if you're in the audience and you want to drop a question in the chat, this is a good time to do that. Amy, Kat, Rona, can you give me, to our Miami panelists, I'm excited about this energy from Miami here. Can you give one piece of pithy, concise advice to our Miami panelists working on these issues? Amy, you want to kick us off?
Sure, I can kick you off. So I think, one thing I would encourage Miami leadership to do is to, encourage your agency leaders and other folks participating in the process to devote focused time to the Rainproof process. I think the fact that our agency made it a priority allowed us to sort of, have focused time on our calendars to really facilitate meetings, to contribute to events, to really participate in the dialogue that was happening. So I think that commitment really demonstrated sort of the impact of the work. So that would be my advice.
Love it. Kat?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in general, just having expectations, not high expectations because you want to set yourself up to, but not having low expectations, right? Just having expectations of how things are going to go and just understand that it's going to be messy. It's especially when you're getting all sorts of stakeholders in the room, just again, going back to expectations. But I also would say that find in that group, find allies. If you're not cut out with the big group, and if in my case it was Jill and Sailor, we really bonded and we really had some goals that we wanted to get done through our organizations. We had a lot of commonality, and so we also just worked that relationship offline. And sometimes you need to take matters into your own hands, especially when it comes to community engagement. I have to say it honestly, because ultimately we're here for the people. We're here to serve the people. It doesn't go the other way around. So that's just my take anyway. I don't know.
Rona?
Yeah, my piece of advice actually was related to what, a theme of what I've already heard from the folks in Miami, which is that, the community engagement is so key and really, inviting people to the table, but also like boots on the ground in the community, going to the people, because a lot of times they just don't have the bandwidth to come to a meeting and they need to see us in the community and know that we care. So thank you for the work that you all are doing in Miami.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see this momentum and the work that's happening and the work that is planned, and to see people at so many different scales talking about the importance of centering that community engagement as really central and not peripheral to getting this work done right. So with that, I'm gonna pass it off to Rainfall to moderate some questions from our audience. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Julia, for moderating this. And it was so exciting seeing familiar faces on the panel, and as well as learning the excitement from Miami. We have a few questions in limited time, so I'm going to choose some of the questions that I think this panel could really answer. For the first question, I'm going to direct it at Kat and Rona, because I think we did a lot of this work in Working Group 3, which is, for the general public, so much attention peaks around the storm, but then fades. So thinking about our before, during, and after scales that we thought about in working group 3, the real work tends to happen between the storms. How do you keep people engaged during the sunny days?
Did you want to go first, Kat?
I could go.
Okay.
So I think it's just, um, yeah, absolutely. We do talk a lot about blue skies, or we have different words for it, but ultimately, I think what I like about the Department of Health in particular is that we do look at holistically. So even if it's not necessarily hurricane season, we could talk about, just again throwing out examples, we could talk about heat. We could talk about heat and health when that happens in summertime. During wintertime, we tend to talk about frostbite. We talk about power outages, which have those similarly emergency like messages. And so I guess it's just, again, always checking in and figuring out ways to tailor that climate message, but maybe from a different lens. And I totally agree with Rona. We have to come to them. It's just always showing up, saying hello, and that we're there. And so then that way, when it is, I mean, I hope not, but if something serious happens, then they know that they could give us a call and we could figure something out. And I think also that I would also say that climate resilience doesn't just have to be emergency management. It can be also fun activities. For instance, something related to art or music or theater, or it could be gardening. So I would just say getting creative that and make it unique to your organization is how I would keep people engaged with it.
Yeah, just building on that, I think the social cohesion part is super important. So a lot of what I'm doing on the in-between days is just continuing to build relationships in the community and taking a page out of Mayor Omar's playbook of like, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. That's an African American proverb, I think. But I think that that's really the key, is that like we have to be doing this when there's not crisis, so that people can really take it in, and that also so that the recovery when the things happen hopefully are much stronger, because people have those relationships already and they can move together.
Thank you. I know that was a lot of what we were focused on in working group 3. How to get everyone involved, how to keep them involved, how to normalize rainproof as kind of a new reality of ours. For the next question, I'm going to direct it towards Miami, because this is an event towards envisioning what a rainproof Miami could look like. So it's really understanding where Miami is right now. So for my Miami panelists, for those of you who are working with communities impacted by flooding, what kind of responses are you seeing from the communities? How are people reacting? Are they motivated to overcome it, or do you sense a feeling of despair? Yeah. No, whoever wants to take us.
I can start if that's what folks want. Okay. Well, I think for better or worse, the response from residents depends on where they live. And so you have, residents in, say, the city of Miami Beach who are, let's say, well educated on the investments that their local government is making. And so maybe they're experiencing sunny day flooding, but there's a connection there that my city is making investments to try and address this. Then there's, of course, residents who are experiencing flooding at a way more impactful scale, right? Residents in more vulnerable communities that live in, say, a bowl. And when they have intense rainfall and they have major flooding, they can't even flush their toilets. I mean, the response is different depending on the investments that your local government is making and your lived experience on the intensity of the event. And so I think it sort of ranges. And so for all of us as government, and for example, for county government, where we're sort of the umbrella and we are responsible for all of these almost 3 million people, the onus is on us to be sensitive to those differences in reaction and lived experience, because it is real and it is impacting people very differently. But I think, to end sort of on a more optimistic note, there are ways that we've been able to try and address this through, say, broad policy, that we do think are proving, to have good results. And so, for example, the county recently, we got our community rating, or CRS, lowered from 5 to 3, which is great, for FEMA. But what is actually good about that is that it meant 33% savings in flood insurance for almost 1 million people. And so we're actually seeing that when we can tie these interventions to, of course, like money savings, the insurance is a huge issue here in South Florida and throughout the state of Florida. It's giving people optimism, but then it's also creating that political will that Mayor Nickerson was talking about, to actually get some of these smaller cities to say, hey, that's actually a great thing for both my residents and their pocketbooks. I want to prioritize that.
That's amazing to hear. I know we're at time for our panel discussion, but Mayor Omar or David, if you want to add anything, and then I think that will set us up for our interactive session.
I mean, I just think that, just everything here that was said, we just keep it all in mind. I think that, and of course, everything I've said today, I've looked at it from like a political or electoral point of view. That's just kind of how, it's so good when so many different individuals come together from so many different areas, because you get so much information, because we all have like our our specialized areas to look at. But I think that, and a lot of times you'll hear like on the news and things like that, or just through like an election cycle, like, oh, it's the economy, it's this, it's this. And I think we could become so immune to it that we really don't understand how deep that goes. But education, what like kind of Rona was saying and Kat was saying, is like the key education of like the residents. Because when the economy is bad, people look at like climate change as something that they can deal with tomorrow. When the economy is bad, they're like, we just want to focus on like my family, food, a job that can get my family what it needs. Like, what are you guys talking about when it comes to, sea level rise? That doesn't affect me right now. I'm worried about the economy and my job and food every day. But they don't understand the connection of how that is, because then when you get any type of event, it destroys that household. And so the education piece is really, really important when it comes to that. And when you guys hear those things like the economy, the inflation level and things like that, I understand that it could just be like one of those things that go in one ear and out the other, but it relates to everything we're talking about today. So it's really important.
Okay, perhaps we can move to our interactive session that I think our last question actually really set us up for. Thank you all for such great discussion and insights. I think I've learned so much about Miami just through this event. And I think there's a lot of synergies between New York City and Miami, and just understanding the complexities of these issues and the complexities and nuances of how different sectors interact. I know there's some answers to audience questions already happening in the chat. So perhaps we'll get to those as well. But I really want us to use that last question and really use this moment to start envisioning what a Rainproof Miami could look like. And so for closing us off, we're doing an interactive session that we've been practicing that came out of Rainproof New York City, in working with these different people and different sectors and stakeholders. Is we typically like to collect responses to see where people are at, and using these responses, we'd be able to kind of see, okay, what are the next steps to actually building a Rainproof Miami? What could that look like? How do we start foundationing it? Recognizing that Miami is different from New York City, even though they do have synergies, because as a whole, Rainproof is meant to be a replicable process. So what I just added to the chat is the Mentimeter link, and you could click that link, you can use the code. And the first questioning I'm going to open up to the full audience that we have today that seems very, very excited and that's inspiring to me is, what specific challenges or barriers on becoming Rainproof should a Rainproof Miami address? So Rainproof process as a whole is meant to address those challenges that we typically can't within our own sectors. So what could this process give us an opportunity to address? And I know for me, I'm trying to understand Miami more and more and how their barriers work. So I'm going to give us 2 minutes to add our responses, maybe call some out. Let me know if anyone is having issues with joining the Mentimeter. Yeah, we had the same challenge in Rainproof, New York City. Personally, I come from an immigrant family household, speaks Arabic. They do not care about climate change, and until it literally affected them. And so I was learning how to translate these issues into different languages, different cultures. We tapped into faith-based institutions, for example, that didn't really touch on climate. Those are some ways that Rainproof New York City did it. So it'd be interesting to show how Rainproof Miami could address it. Lack of trust, yeah. Rethinking infrastructure to work with nature. That was like a lot of the recommendations that came out of it. Lack of trust in our politicians. That was kind of how Rainproof New York City really came about, particularly after COVID. And when bringing different sectors together, there's a distrust, which is why we really built those events. I think Mayor Omar pressed on this of like the other pressing priorities like housing affordability, transportation. And I think it's really important in doing rainproof work by bringing people together is to show that there's values in all these priorities, but that they're all linked and looking at a bigger picture of them. And I think that's like the beauty of rainproof. And as a whole, like Kat said, it's setting your expectations, but also having a balance of both flexibility and having a structure to follow along of like, what are we really trying to come out with an outcome of this? I'll give everyone 30 more seconds before we move into our other two questions. Include natural options, managing public expectation of what specific projects do. I think that was an interesting thing that came out of Rainproof New York City is when we brought all these people together, they really understood why specific projects work the way they do. So I think it helped, for example, lessen the distrust with politicians or agency members, but also simultaneously show the impact of what these projects are meant to be doing, and there's an understanding and education to it. I'm going to move us to the next question, which is, if we were to develop a Rainproof Miami, we've spoken so much in Rainproof New York City about how we did a lot of, I guess, strategic outreach into trying to get as many boroughs, as many experiences, as many expertise involved. To develop a Rainproof Miami, who would you want to be involved in the process? Who should be part of the process, whether it is the multilingual or the multicultural? Landscape architects, yep. Those were a really big part of Rainproof New York City. We have our own, very own Rona, but so many other people that are community-based organizations. And perhaps the person that wrote that, if they have ideas of those community-based organizations, can drop them into the chat or just add them here. And we can start building a database of all the people that we should be connecting with. Experts on implementing nature-based features. It'd be interesting for the person that wrote specific households, what areas or what households. I know in New York City, a lot of our issues were around renter versus people that owned, but also in areas that weren't documented on our data maps of flooding. Bankers. I know I saw someone in the chat talk about insurance. We need health workers, regulators. There's a lot of really cool people that should be involved in this process that I'm seeing. And I'd love to know like examples or if anyone has ideas of people in particular that we should be tapping into. Yeah, I think it's also interesting. Like for me, it was like seeing the panel on multiple levels. Miami is definitely very different from New York on that level. So having from on every regional scale or every local scale to non-local scale. I think I will give us 30 more seconds again, and then we'll move to our last question in this session. And you will have a readout of all of these responses back and we'll send it to you with the slides deck for today. I'm going to move us on to our last question, which is, in your perspective and in your idea, after hearing our great panel discussion, after hearing about what Miami faces, how Rainproof New York City came about and how it really was a process, what are the next steps in your perspective should be taken to develop this Rainproof Miami process? And I'll give us 1 minute for this before closing us off on time. I know for Rainproof New York City, how we started developing it was taking it from research and then having a lot of hard conversations with the steering committee, building the steering committee, figuring out who should be there, doing a lot of research by going to like events, doing a systematic analysis of what it would actually look like, having the research done. So I'm curious to see how what Miami's next step should be. Master planning with public input. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what that could look like here. Maybe like an event or something of that sort. Find funding. Interestingly, in Rainproof New York City, we actually got philanthropic funding, but we also, as part of the participants, found private stakeholders or private funders that were really able to kind of show us what next steps and what other resources we could tap into. For the person that develop a multidisciplinary diverse steering committee, it'd be interesting who you envision to be as part of that steering committee, and what the multidisciplinary could look like. And for us, it was part NGOs, whether it was community-based or people that had more focus on policy versus different New York City agencies. The convened government agencies is very interesting because that was the first step we did after our research, which is we brought them together for a symposium. So again, seeing a lot of synergies between Miami and New York City and what the process could look like. I'm going to close this off here and turn it back to Rachel and Julia for any last remarks and to close us off. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, I know we're at time, so I won't talk long. I just want to say a really heartfelt thank you to our panelists for their time and their wisdom and sharing in this conversation with us, and to everyone who joined to listen and contribute with questions in the chat and in the interactive session. Really appreciate all of you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. You guys take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting, everybody.
Thank you.